Welcome to the video tutorial of database management system. In previous tutorial, there is a discussion about the data model. What is a data model? What are the types of data model? So in previous tutorial, discussion about definition of data model, what is the concept of data model, then how data is stored in network model, how data is stored in a hierarchical model, and how the data is stored in a relational model. So learning outcome of this tutorial are what is the ER model, that is an entity relationship model. What are the different components of ER model that are used while drawing the diagram? What are the symbols are used for ER diagram? Then what is the attribute and what are the different types of attribute? So these are the learning outcome of this tutorial. Now we start with the first topic, that is the ER model. So ER model stands for the entity relationship model. ER model is a high level data model. It is based on the perception of the real world that consists set of basic objects which is called as the entities. It consists set of basic objects which called as the entities and the relationship among those data. Means what? You have to design a ER model, but that ER model is based on which thing? It is based on the perception of the real world. Means you have to assume the real world situation. Suppose consider the hospital management system. So you have to make the perception about the hospital management system. There is a reception, there are different types of doctors, different types of ward, patients. So all that thing and hospital, all that thing you have to consist that thing as an entity and you have to show the relationship among those data. Okay, so that is the ER model. Means ER model is based on the perception of real world, which consists set of basic objects called entities and relationship among those data. What are the different components of ER model? So components of ER model are: first is a entity, second is attribute, third one is a relationship, fourth one is a domain, fifth is an entity set, and last one is a key. Okay. So these are the six important components of ER model. Okay. And we can see one by one. First component is a first component of a ER model is an entity. Okay. So an entity is an object that exists and dissimilar from the other object. So what is an entity? So entity is an object that exists, means it is in exist, because entity relationship model is based on the perception of real world. So it is exist and it can be a dissimilar from other object. So that is the entity. Entity can be a person, place. Entity can be a person, place, event, or object that is relevant to the given system. So in previous slide we discussed about the hospital management system. Okay. So what are the different types of person are involved in hospital management system? Where is the place or where is the location? What are the different events? Events means words or objects. Okay. So hospital itself is an one entity. in the hospital management system. There is another entity is a doctor, another entity is a person, a patient. If you are going in detail also, there is a lab, also receptionist. So all these are considered as an entity, which are based on the perception of your real world. Okay, there are no limitation about the entity, but it should be a specific to that diagram or model. So that is the entity, which can be a person, place, event, or object that are relevant to that given system. Entity is denoted by the rectangle. Entity in a ER diagram. Entity is denoted by the rectangle. So this is the symbol for representing the entity. Example, consider one entity, student. Student is a one entity. Again, bank is a one entity. Okay, so you can take any example for the entity, but it is exist, and that is dissimilar from the other object. Such object is called as an entity. Second concept about the ER model, or second important component of the ER model, that is an attribute. So attribute is what? Each entity has a particular characteristics or properties that describe that entity. So consider one entity considered student. Student is a one entity. So what are the characteristics or properties of student? Student having the one unique number, that is the enrollment number or PRN number. Student also have the name, address, mobile number, blood group, age, height, okay, which course student is studied. Okay, so that are all the characteristics of that student which describe that student. Okay. So student is an entity. So what is the attribute? So attribute are the particular characteristics or properties that describe that entity. Attributes are represented by the oval. So this is the symbol for representing the attributes. Entity is denoted by the rectangle, while attributes are denoted or represented by the oval. So consider one example of student entity. Okay, so student is an one entity. So roll number is an attribute. Name is another attribute of student. Address. Okay, so these are the attributes, okay, which describe this student entity. Okay, roll number, name, address. Okay, so you can take number of attributes as per your requirement or as per your perception, what you are thinking about that entity. Okay, according to that you are able to take the any number of attributes, but that are specific to that particular entity. Okay, so this is the attribute. Now next type of concept about the ER model is a relationship. So relationship is an association between the several entities. If we are going to consider the example of hospital management system, so what are the entities are present there? So hospital is an one entity, doctor is an entity, patient is an entity. So what is the relation between hospital and doctor? What is the relationship between patient and doctor? Okay, so for representing the relation, we have to use the relationship. So it is an association between the entities. Okay, suppose consider one entity, that is the student. Another entity is a department. So every student is related with a particular department. Suppose you are the computer engineering student, so your department is a computer engineering. There are also another department, civil engineering, mechanical engineering, electronics engineering. But which is your department? Your department is a computer engineering. So consider student is a one entity and department is a another entity. So students are the member of computer engineering department. So relationship is represented by the diamond. Okay, relationship is represented by which symbol? It is represented by the diamond symbol. Entity is represented by the rectangle. And this association, the lines are the association. These lines, student to this diamond and department to this diamond. So these lines are the association. So student is a member of department. So which department? So it comes the attribute computer engineering department. Okay, location. Okay, so this is the relationship. So relationship is represented by diamond. Okay. Next is a domain. So each attribute comes from a specified domain. So there are lot of domain, but every attribute comes from the specified domain. So that is the domain. Next is the entity set. Collection of similar entities. Okay. There are number of entities available, but if similar entities are there, then you can call that similar entity as an entity set. Next, an important concept about the AR model, that is the key. So it is the minimal set of attributes for an entity. It is the minimal set of attributes for an entity set such that each entity in the set can be uniquely identified. Okay. So what is the meaning of that? Suppose there are a number of hospitals are present in the city, but every hospital has a uniqueness. What is that uniqueness? Uniqueness means what? Their name, their ID, or their location. So that is the uniqueness. Okay. Now consider another example as a student. Okay. Student is an entity. So what is the uniqueness in student? There are number of students are present in one college. So how we can identify the student? So university provide a separate identification number to each student. Okay, that is known as the enrollment number or PRN number. Okay, so every student have a uniqueness. Okay, names, student names may be same, your surname may be same, your address, area, your belong to that particular city, that may be same, but the unique ID that is provided by the university, that is not the same. It is unique. Every student has a unique number. That number is known as the enrollment number or PRN number. So consider one example of student entity. This is the enrollment number, name, address, age. So this enrollment number, okay, key is represented in a oval because it is an attribute. It is an attribute. What is the key? First, that you should understand. Student is an entity where these all are the attributes. But from these all attribute, which is the key attribute? So key attribute is an enrollment number because every student has a unique enrollment number. There is a name, there are name must be same, your address must be same, and age must be same. But enrollment number is not same. It is a unique because it is provided by the university to all the students. So such a type of attribute, such attribute is called as a key attribute, and it is represented like this. You have to make an underline to that name of the attribute. So this is the key attribute. Now, what are the symbols or what are the diagrammatic convention used for ER diagram? For representing an entity, we have to use the rectangle. So rectangle or entity is denoted by the rectangle. Next, how weak entity is represented. So weak entity is represented by the double rectangle. So what is the weak entity that we are going to see in the next slides? Diamond is used to represent the relationship. Lines are represent to links or association between the different entities. Next, oval. Oval is used to represent the attributes. So this is the key attribute. Next symbol is for key attribute. So double oval is used to represent the multi-valued attribute. Suppose your mobile number, you are having more than one mobile number. Email ID, lot of students having more than one email ID. So such attribute is represented by the multi-value attribute. Means that particular property or characteristics have multiple value. So they are represented by the double oval. Last diagrammatic convention is a derived attribute. Okay, so all these we are going to see in detail. What is the attribute? What is a key attribute? Multi-value attribute? Derived attribute. But these symbols you have to use while drawing the ER diagram. So these are the diagrammatic convention used for ER diagram. Now next, types of attribute. Okay. So before starting with the types of attribute, all of you know that what is the attribute. So attribute is what? Attribute is represented or it describes the particular characteristics or properties about the entities. Okay. We have also taken one example of student entity. Now there are four types of attribute. First type is a simple and composite attribute. Second is a single value and multi-value attribute. Third one is a derived attribute, and last one is a key attribute. Okay. So we see the first type of attribute, that is a simple and composite attribute. So again we are going to consider student as a one entity. Student ID is a one attribute. Student name is a second attribute. So first name and last name are the again attributes. So student ID is a simple attribute. Why it is simple attribute? Because this ID is not divided into the subparts. Okay. The attribute that are not divided into the subpart, such attribute is known as the simple attribute. But the attribute which are divided into the subpart, such type of attribute is called as a composite attribute. That is the name. But name is divided into the first name, middle name, last name. That's why name is considered as a composite type of attribute. Okay. So simple attribute, the attribute that are not divisible are called as a simple attribute. That is the ID. So ID is not divided. So ID is a simple attribute. Composite attribute. So attribute that are divided into the smaller subparts, which represent the more basic attributes with the independent meaning. Okay. So example of the composite attribute is a name. because name is divided into the further subparts. So what are that subpart? First name, middle name, last name, okay, which represent the independent meaning. Okay, so that is the first type of attribute, simple and composite attribute. Second type of attribute is a single value and multi-value attribute. Consider one example of entity. So class is an entity. So every class has a fixed location. Means your class location is suppose A building, third floor, and XYZ classroom number. Okay, so that is the location of second year class. Teachers are the attribute for that class. Teachers are what? They are the attributes. So consider one example of class. So class name is a second year computer engineering. Location is A building, third floor, in XYZ classroom. Okay. So teachers, why teachers are represented by the double oval? Because it is a multi-value attribute. For second year computer engineering, there are 5 to 6 teachers comes into the classroom and they taught the different subjects or they are teaching the different subject to all the class. Means only one teacher is not there. There are multiple teachers for multiple subjects. So again, subject is a multi-value attribute because you are not going to learn only one subject. You are going to learn multiple subjects. So that subject having the multiple value, right? So that is the multi-value attribute. Location is a only one location. It cannot be changed or it cannot have the multiple value. So that's why it is represented by the single one. So location is a single attribute while teachers are the multiple attribute. Again, you can consider subject as a multi-value attribute. So single value attributes are the attribute that holds exactly one value. Okay, that holds exactly one value. Multi-value attributes. So attribute that holds more than one value for a particular entity. Suppose consider student as a one entity. Then mobile number, email ID are the multi-value attribute because almost all the students having the more than one email ID, more than one mobile number. Okay, so mobile number or email ID considered as a multi-value attribute. Next type of attribute is a derived attribute. So derived attribute is an attribute which can be obtained from the other attribute or related entities. Okay, it is obtained. Okay, it is obtained from certain calculation or from certain scenario. So such attribute is known as a derived attribute. Take an example of derived attribute. So date of birth is a one entity. So how date of birth is calculated? Okay, so calculating the date of birth. Sorry, so date of birth is one entity. Now take a present date as one attribute and you have to calculate your current age. Okay, so from these two things you can calculate the age of that particular person. Okay, because from the present date you have to minus your date of birth. Okay, so present date, from present date you have to minus your date of birth, so you will get the age of person. Okay, so that is the derived attribute. So why it is a derived attribute? Because this age is calculated from the date of birth and present date. That's why it is referred as a derived attribute, and derived attribute is represented by the dotted oval. So that is the derived attribute. Now next and last type of attribute is a key attribute. The attribute which uniquely identifies the individual entity. Such an attribute is called as a key attribute. So hospital is a one entity. So hospital ID, hospital name are maybe the key attribute. For student, Student ID or enrollment number is a key attribute. For laptop, suppose laptop is a one entity. So what is the key attribute for laptop? The model number or name, that is the key attribute for the laptop. For mobile, what is a key attribute? So the model number is a key attribute. So the attribute that are uniquely identify that particular entity is known as the key attribute. So take an example of employee. So employee is a one entity. So employee ID is a key attribute because every employee, the company provided the employee ID to each and every employee. So this is the key attribute, or it is also known as the primary key, because from the employee ID you can uniquely identify that employee. Right? If there are 1,000 employees in that industry, in that 1,000 employee, lot of employee having the same name. So you cannot identify with the name. So for that purpose, each employee having the unique ID, and that ID is known as the employee ID. And that particular ID is refer as a that particular attribute as a refer as a key attribute, or it is also known as the primary key. So these are the remaining attributes: employee name, employee department, employee address. Okay. You cannot refer the remaining attribute as a key attribute because employee name, another employee having also the same name. So a lot of employee having the same department, address should be also same. Okay, so only employee ID is attribute. From that attribute, we can uniquely identify that particular employee. So such a attribute is known as the key attribute or the primary key. So this is all for this tutorial. So what we have discussed in this tutorial. So we started with the ER model. What is the ER model? Which is based on the perception of real world. Then we have seen the components of ER model: entity, attribute, relationship, domain, entity set, and key attribute. Then after that we will see the diagrammatic convention. What are the symbols are used for drawing the ER diagram? After that we discuss about the types of attribute. So there are four important types of attribute. First is a simple and composite type of attribute. Second one is the single and multi-value attribute. Third one is the derived attribute. And last and most important is the key attribute, which is also known as the primary key. So this is all for this tutorial. Thank you.